I feel like most of we're called to be the light on the hill, right? We're
Right.
called
Yep.
to preach the word. And I find what most people don't understand about that, or I don't know if they don't understand, but maybe they just don't think about it. And I know I didn't for a long time is, dude, the most powerful example is your example. It's not your
Totally.
words,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
It's your
Yeah.
actions,
Yep.
right? And that's something in the world today, I feel very strongly that we've forgotten. Everyone talks about, the power, and like, look, words are powerful. Obviously, we're on a podcast. We're,
Right.
we're
Right.
using our
Yeah.
words right now. But, Christ's words were obviously powerful because he was God teaching eternal lessons.
Faithfulness is at the core of me being a founder.
Good business values and ethics come from the Bible.
Lead with your relationship with Christ. Lead with your knowledge of the gospel.
Everybody, welcome to Faithful Founder. I'm very excited to have Jeremy Graves with us today as my guest.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And we've been trying to do this for a while, obviously.
Yeah. My back didn't let me last time. I apologize.
No,
but
it's okay.
I'm getting older, bro. That's the problem.
It's okay. Well, I'm really excited to have you. It's because you're a doctor, all that stress,
Yeah, that's a lot of it for sure.
So we were talking about can you tell us what you're a doctor in? What's your background?
My PhD is in transformational leadership. So I have a very interesting story of getting to the PhD. So I have a bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies in which anything that ends in studies probably isn't a real degree. But anyway,
I went to a liberal arts college, so I understand.
Emphasis in leadership and human relations.
Gotcha.
And then I have a master's in theological studies because I was thinking that that I was a pastor at the time, and I was thinking that that's the route I was going to go. But then made an about face and did this doctorate in transformational leadership.
So so why did you feel like you were called to do that about face, or
So I was in the church for many years and really loved it, but really started to sense God saying, I actually want you outside the walls of the church.
That's awesome.
And so I knew that a master's in theological studies was only going to get me so many openings.
Sure, yeah. I could imagine.
And most of that was going to be in a religious setting. And so for me, I was like, I really want, no offense to Christian colleges, I'm all for them.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to be in a place where I could really let my light shine. And so I knew that I needed to get a degree that would sustain that.
I feel like most of we're called to be the light on the hill, right? We're called to preach the word. And I find what most people don't understand about that, or I don't know if they don't understand, but maybe they just don't think about it. And I know I didn't for a long time is, dude, the most powerful example is your example. It's not your words, right?
Yeah, 100%.
It's your actions, right? And that's something in the world today, I feel very strongly that we've forgotten. Everyone talks about the power, and like, look, words are powerful. Obviously, we're on a podcast. We're using our words right now. But, Christ's words were obviously powerful because he was God teaching eternal lessons.
Right.
But it was also, he led by his example, right? He said, come and follow me. It was a verb, it was action, right?
Yep.
And so I love to hear that you said, and look, we need the pastors, we need the priests, we need,
I did it for 18 years.
Right, exactly. We need those, right? But but yet at the same time, I have found, like we were just talking about Coach Spencer Danielson from Boise State,
The
right?
Boise State.
Yeah, exactly. The Boise State Broncos. But and his, like you were just telling me that a bunch of students asked him to baptize them, right? And he's not a preacher, he's not a pastor, but he led with his example, right? And that to me is just, I don't know how if you would agree with that. It sounds like you would.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the example of, in Coach Danielson's case, it is the example of loving well, of making it a priority to say, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it.
Yeah.
There is this video that happened when he was announced as coach. It's a pretty powerful video.
Yeah.
So when he was announced as coach, the players are jumping up and down.
Yeah.
And one of the first things he said to him is, if you don't know Jesus, you need to.
Yeah.
Like, right out of the gate, and the players,
I remember that, man.
And the players knew him because obviously he was the defensive coordinator,
right?
So the players knew him. But like in the new role, he set the stage right from the beginning. This is the example I want to leave.
Yeah, and the players followed him.
Absolutely.
I've seen. I think sports is one of the greatest places for Christian faith. Like I grew up playing sports, and I think athletes, because of their nature, are very like a lot of them are outspoken about what they believe. You have to have this sort of confidence to be an athlete, right?
Yeah, sure.
And especially if you want to be a good one, you have to have confidence, right? And that confidence rolls over into their faith. Like there's no other I don't think arena where you hear Christ's name proclaimed as much outside the church than as in athletics, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree.
And so and so to hear him set that bar immediately and say, "This is what we believe,"
Yep.
and you're seeing that across the nation. Like I saw a thing about, I guess Ohio State, a bunch of their players got like a mass baptism,
Oh, really?
mass conversion
Wow.
at the beginning of the season, right? Which is really, I think, inspiring, but also telling of, here you have these young men predominantly saying, what the world is teaching me is not enough.
Yep.
And they're realizing that.
Yeah.
And these are people at the pinnacle of what they do. Like,
Yeah.
you can't get better than Ohio State. You can't get better than Boise State. You know,
Right.
go Broncos, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. But
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're Boise State here all the way. But with that being said, no, so I want to go into this too. You clearly, when you decided to switch paths, to follow that call that you
Yeah.
felt like you had, you knew you were going to wear your faith on your sleeve. It didn't sound like you were going to hide it by any means,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, the funny part is I literally do wear my faith on my sleeve.
Yes, there you go. Literally Jesus on your arm. I love
Exactly.
it.
I knew that making that decision. So a little bit of my history. So I was in the church. I was a youth pastor for many years, and then was a college pastor. We started a small little training program that I oversaw for a few years, and so I've had this like real heart for the younger generation, and I knew that the best way to reach the younger generation was to be around the younger generation. But I had to think differently about it in the sense of, if I wanted to go work at a university that was not a Christian university, then I had to also be aware of what all of that meant.
Yes.
And so in that process of saying yes to Jesus and like, okay, this is the direction that I feel that you're calling me. So I've been there 10 years now, and I love it. I absolutely love.
How do you? Sorry, I don't mean to
Yeah, go
interrupt.
ahead. You're
But like,
good.
you're not at a faith-based university.
No,
you're at
no,
a state
it
university.
is a
right?
state university.
Boise State,
Yeah.
obviously. And there's, I don't know because I'm not a professor. I would assume that sometimes it felt maybe in the beginning that you had to walk on eggshells.
Oh yeah,
almost,
yeah. I
right?
it definitely felt that
okay.
way. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely felt that way. What was really interesting was that it didn't take long. So I always start my classes with full long sleeves,
Gotcha.
and then what I do throughout the semester is I literally roll my sleeves up,
Slowly point the curtain back. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what started to happen was I started to have students start to ask me about my tattoos initially. My tattoos tell my entire story of my faith journey, my family. I studied in Jerusalem, at Jerusalem University, so I've got things. So I get to just tell this story. But what I found was that students were very open.
Yeah.
They were very open to hear about Jesus.
Yeah.
Interesting. One of my first classes, I remember having a conversation with a student afterwards, and one of the things that he said to me was, "I went to this thing when I was in high school where it was like, and I think it was probably an FCA or something like that,
right.
where he said we went and they talked to us about Jesus, but no one ever told me how to know the guy. They just talked about him."
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And so after class, we were walking across campus, and he was like, "So no, really, like, how do you know the guy?" So I was
incredible.
like, what an awesome opportunity,
Yeah.
right there.
I'm sure that's not the only time that's happened.
No,
either,
it
right?
happens quite a bit. And the thing is I just let the students take the lead.
Yeah.
They're hungry, they're searching, they're asking questions. And here's the thing: if I make a very clear point at the beginning of the semester to learn their names, and that makes a huge difference. When they walk through the door and I can greet them by their name, because names are powerful, man. They're super powerful. And so greeting them by their name, I've had students say to me, I've gone to school here, because I teach upper division classes. I've gone to school here 3 years. I've had never had a professor know my name.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, your classes, right? Like, it's a lecture hall.
Yeah.
It's not a small group.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a small group, but
Gotcha.
but for the most part, they're larger, classes. And so getting to know their names, huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
So you said, I want to, this is kind of, I want to get into servant leadership, because obviously
love
this
it.
is a podcast for the faithful founder, for the start. Like, I'm a startup founder, and I'm in the very, midst of the grind of what this journey is all about.
Yep.
But I've decided from the very beginning to that what we do with our company is that we're going to glorify God's name.
Love it.
That is the ultimate mission. Now, we have other missions, right? But the top tier, our top focus is to glorify God's name with what we're doing, right? No, but I do want to, before I get into that, I wanted to ask you, for a while there, I was really interested in like the history of the new atheist movement, right?
Okay.
Because the early 2000s, the Richard Dawkins and the Hitchens, and, the Four
Yep.
Horsemen, all those, right?
Yep.
And for a long time, it was a lot of young people in the early 2000s were drawn to the new atheist movement, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've seen a switch over the last couple of years, and you would know better than I would being around these young people, right? That more and more of them are not open to atheism. I feel like they're open to spirituality.
Oh, yeah.
New ageism, right? A lot of that. I was just listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about how, like I said before, it was, I rejected the church growing up, or we weren't very religious, and the new atheists just, the God delusion, and they, worship the book and they listen to all the lectures. And today it's the crystals, it's the Wiccan kind of stuff, and the pagan origin sort of things, right? And I find it so interesting that they tried this believe in nothing thing. They tried this morality is relative. Moral relativism, I think, is a poison in our society.
Oh,
personally,
yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not unabashed about that, right? So you're saying yes to that. So
Yeah.
I feel like you've seen that. I find it now. With that being said, a lot of these people that I know that have tried this new age stuff and the spirituality stuff also find it very unfulfilling. And there's been an influx back into Christianity.
Yep.
Specifically, I've seen with Eastern Christianity, because there is this feel of mysticism. There is this feel of there's more in the mystery of it. I don't know if you've seen any of that. But
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I have seen with students is this desire for relationship
Absolutely.
and real relationship, and I think that what they found when they look at, well, it's all relative. What works for you works for you. What works for me works for me. Like, they found that really empty because it lacked substance and it lacked relational being.
And you learn very quickly that's not true.
Totally,
Just like by your lived experience,
Exactly,
we
yeah.
can. There's obviously extreme examples that you can use, but everyone knows in their heart
Yep.
this whole, like, there is clearly an objective truth, an objective morality. Therefore, there must be an objective lawgiver.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that what I notice with students in my interaction with them is that they're searching. They're really
More so today than they have in the past.
I think so. I think they're really searching, and they're drawn to people who have a real understanding of faith and what that means. And I mean, you could, to circle back, you look at someone like Coach Danielson, who is very, very outspoken about his belief.
Yes.
And it's like moth to a flame, right? They're drawn to it.
The stadium erupted when he said that.
Yeah.
That was the part that got me the most, is listening to him when he said that, was how he had to stop.
Yeah.
Because you could tell he was going to keep talking, right? Yeah. But like the crowd erupted and loved what he was saying.
Yeah.
And so I think in that moment he realized, I have to say more.
Yeah.
And he continued, like he said, preach. He didn't just state facts, he preached.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think there's clearly a hunger for that.
So there's a movement, I think, towards authenticity. And when I say authenticity in this context that we're talking about, it's people who know what they believe, why they believe it.
Yes, absolutely.
And help others understand why that's important. And for me, that's what I see as the call that God has placed on my life, whether that's with my consulting work, working with teams, or being a professor at a university.
Yeah.
Like those are, and plus I lead a team at the university as well.
Gotcha.
They all know what I believe. They all know my background. Now, they don't all share the same belief system that I share. But we have some great conversations about it. And we had a really terrible thing happen with one of our team members' family. A son-in-law passed away several years ago. And in the midst of all of that, everyone turned back to, hey, Jeremy, can you go help that person? Can you? My boss even said, just go do that pastor stuff that you do.
That's awesome.
So
yeah, I find I was going to ask, because one of the things that I've talked about with my co-founders is, look, we're going to lead with our values, and we're all Christian, right? Like, we're going to lead with our Christian values. And people, when they ask, and what's different about this company, they can point to, well, the founders, I don't think I can really think of as the founders, they act in a leader-servant way based off of their Christian faith. They live out their values, and we've said, like, obviously we're not just going to hire Christians, and what I'm saying?
Right, yeah.
Right. But my hypothesis is, is that people will want to work with us because of the high value they set, and then the fact that we will value people not just from a business perspective, but from a human
Yeah,
perspective, that we'll
exactly.
see them as more, as made in the image of God. Do you see that in, like, with leading your team,
Yeah.
for instance, that they may not be Christian or believe the same way, but they appreciate your value system because of how you treat them?
Yeah, I'll tell you what's interesting. So I lead a team of, there's like 7 of us, and then there's probably 13, 14 faculty who are report up through there. But
Yeah.
we're a part of a larger division at the university. There's about 175 people that are part of that division.
Okay.
And I have had numerous people come to me and say, I want to be a part of your team.
That's awesome,
I
man.
see how
Yeah.
you lead, how your team, how you care about your team.
Yeah.
And so they see
It's
a
a
difference.
theory and practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it. Like,
Yeah.
and I talk a lot, so I tell people I'm a researcher. But if you research just for the sake of research, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
It's research for the sake of application.
Absolutely.
And so in that case, what I believe about people being created in the image of Christ and what that looks like means that comes out in how I interact with them. That comes out in our conversations. That comes out in when they're walking through certain things, how I respond and what that looks like.
Yeah.
At the university with my students, and then with clients and others.
Do you feel like, so to the faithful founder, we're speaking to them, right?
Yep.
Speaking to me, I'm obviously a faithful founder and trying to figure it all out right now, so based off of that experience, like you said, it's a principle in action.
Yep.
Do you feel like that would be the same in the business world?
I think I don't know why it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
It should be exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
It's the people that are a part of your team, you're part of your organization. How do you treat them so that they realize that they're not just a number, and they're not just what they do for your company, but who they are?
Yeah.
Because when you value people for who they are, first and foremost, being created in the image of God, then what happens is they want to know more. Like, I've worked at other jobs where I was just a number. I've worked at other jobs where when the layoff hit, it was like, we just prioritize this person and this person and this person, but you're different. Like, why are you showing up different? And when you have to even have the hard conversations, when you're moving towards people with the love of Christ, even the hard conversations, though they're hard, they're seasoned with something, and people know that. I can promise you that they know that.
Do you think that there's a sentiment of they may not remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And that idea of how you actually treated them in that process.
Yeah.
Like, I had to have a really hard conversation with someone on our team about a year ago, and it was a tough conversation, a really hard conversation. And what came out of it, through a lot of tears, and I'll be honest with you, even on my end of of really being torn up about how this conversation went and how it needed to go and those things. That person has several times said to me, it was a really hard conversation, but I learned so much. And then she said, I learned so much about you in that process and how you actually care about us as a team.
Right. And we know and I'm sure you would agree with this, right? The beautiful thing about that is then you can point and say, it's not me.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I said.
It's it's Christ that lives in me, right?
Exactly.
So let's go to the servant leadership,
Yeah,
right? So
perfect.
you're an expert in leadership, obviously.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time studying it.
Yeah. You got a PhD, so I would assume so, I know the answer to this, but I want to ask it for those that may not be believers that may happen upon this podcast. Is Jesus Christ the best leader that's ever lived on the face of the earth?
Absolutely. And
From a secular perspective.
I agree 100% with that. Yep. And I think that he demonstrated beautifully what a servant leader is. So my struggle's maybe not the right word. My work around trying to figure out, how do I tell the Jesus story of servant leadership to business leaders, right?
Yeah.
Without turning them off, but without not compromising what I believe as well. And so the reason that we chose the title, The Leader Paradox, for the book on servant leadership is because of the subtitle, The Unexpected Path to Effective Leadership. And if you read that book as a believer, you will see Jesus
see
on
it.
every page.
Yeah.
If you read that book as a business leader, you will see good, solid business principles that you can use to effectively lead your team. but you may not know that it's actually Jesus that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But what's beautiful about it is I have had so many conversations with people who have read the book and then said, do you have a faith background? It's such a beautiful opportunity.
And you don't
to
mention it
start.
anywhere in the book.
Nowhere in the book is the name of Jesus.
It's just the principles that are clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about behaving ethically and personal integrity. I talk about putting others first. I talk about clearly communicating and listening. I talk about the idea of collaboration. I talk about leading with the future in mind. I talk about self-care and mental health. I talk about continuous team development, but all through this lens of what does it mean to serve your team effectively.
Is that, have you heard of Tom Holland, the historian?
I'm not sure that I have.
So he's got a really popular podcast on I guess on every podcast platform. It's everywhere, but he wrote a book called Dominion, and it was about how he's a really well-known historian, and he started off thinking how he was going to write how the Roman Empire shaped the Western world.
Okay.
And it's his magnum opus, right? It's his masterpiece, right?
Yep.
And he ends up writing a book called Dominion about how Christianity shaped the world. And he's not a believer. He was raised Christian.
Wow.
But it
I'll have
is
to
no
check
longer
that
a
out.
believer. Yeah, it's like a 25-hour audiobook. It's intensive. But I couldn't read that one. I was like, I'm going to have to listen to it. But I'm like 300 pages max, man.
Yeah, I
I'm
gotcha.
capped out. But the audiobook is fantastic. And literally and he goes step by step of these values that you think are just inherent, like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that, I come up against with a lot of times with non-believers, and which is fine there's no way Christianity truly shaped all of our moral intuitions and all of our, but it is especially true in the West that it did,
Yeah,
right? And those things
yeah.
you're talking about, these people, I think they take it for granted. All the principles you mentioned of the ethical and the integrity and leading with the future in mind, all of those things, they can be traced to 2,000 years ago
Exactly.
to a man named Jesus from Nazareth that walked around with these 12 followers of his.
Yeah, totally.
And yet 2,000 years later, it's more applicable today than it probably ever has been.
Yeah, and that's why, to circle back to your question, that's exactly why I believe that Jesus is the best leader who ever lived.
Yeah.
Set the greatest example for us, showed us how to live, and showed us that one of the things that I believe, that leadership is a verb. It's an action. It's something you do. It's not a title that you have.
Yeah.
It's an action that you do.
So talking to the startup founders, the faithful founders,
Yeah.
to them, when they hear servant leadership, be a servant leader, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think it's about two things. It's about serving and leading.
That's groundbreaking.
The reason that we chose the title leader, the paradox piece, is because that's the paradox of leadership. That's the struggle is between service and influence.
Yes.
Right? So leadership is influence. I'm leading my team, moving them forward, but I also am serving them at the same time. And the whole story of servant leadership and where it came from a man by the name of Robert Greenleaf. In the 1960s, he worked at AT&T, and he started looking at this authoritarian top-down leadership, and he's like, this isn't working.
Yeah.
And so he started this idea of like, we need to actually serve our team members. And I still to this day have not actually, he's passed away, but I don't know if he was a believer or not. But he said something that was really interesting to me in the research that I did on him for the book. He talked about the fact that he said there is a difference between a leader who decides to serve and a servant who decides to lead. And he said there's a distinct difference. A leader who decides to serve will always put the good of the company or whatever else before the person. The leader who serves first and leads second is always thinking about the person. Yeah, we can't just let our companies die. We can't just let them go bankrupt.
Right.
But it's the people over the process.
Yeah.
And he said there was a distinct difference between those who lead first and serve second versus those who serve first and lead second.
And I'm guessing that there was correlation with that. The best leaders had the most successful teams and so on and so forth.
And what's interesting is that, Greenleaf wrote about this in the 60s and did a bunch of work around it. And then I didn't find a whole lot of other folks who were writing to business communities until he came across the guy by the name of James Autry, who wrote a book in 1999, just into the year 2000, called The Servant Leader. And he was actually a CEO of a large magazine conglomerate, and Better Homes and Gardens and all of those. And in that process, he he really unpacked a lot of Greenleaf's work for business leaders, and so for me, he was one of the guys that he's 84 now, and but I had the opportunity to interact with him a little bit,
Yeah.
and he helped shape the book, The Leader Paradox, for me. But that's the paradox, that's the tension that you're going to live in if you're going to be a leader who wants to be a servant leader.
Yeah.
Then it's the idea of influence and service.
And we know that's not natural, right? Like we're called to fight against the natural man. We're
Sure.
fallen, right?
Yeah.
And we live in a fallen world, and so we're enticed to do things that are clearly unethical, clearly sinful, right?
Yeah.
Like that is the natural man. That is it's one of the purposes I believe that we're here, and that's pretty clearly written in Scripture as well, is that we are to be tested and tried. We are to deny ourselves and to pick up our cross daily and to
Yep.
follow Him, right?
Yeah.
With that being said, and then knowing that we are fallen and that we do fall into these less than adequate, right, I guess states. How would you tell the founder, or how would you instruct them to remember that? Because it's saying that is one thing.
Yeah,
Saying
yeah.
I'm a leader servant. Saying one day I'm going to do that is one thing.
Yeah.
But putting into practice, because I know right now, thinking for myself, like I believe that like,
Yeah.
full heartedly, right?
Yeah.
Like we are a Christian startup, right? But
Sure.
remembering it in my every interaction, remembering it in my everyday when I'm trying to like build this company, trying to
Yep.
build our revenue up, right? Trying to bring on full-time members, right? Trying to make sure that we take care of our clients, right? It's very easy to forget, oh, I have to serve.
Yeah.
Right. So how would you
Well, first off, I would get the book, The Leader Paradox.
That's
right?
it, that's it.
There's
on
the
Amazon?
plug. There's the plug. It is on
Okay,
Amazon.
cool. I will get it. Yes, absolutely.
I might get you a copy. Just-
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it.
for me, I think it comes down to as a leader, I think we have to create space in our life to check in with ourselves, who we are as a leader, who we want to be. So one of the ways that I do that for me is I look at my calendar every morning. So I have kind of a routine that's pretty important to me throughout my day. And so I get up pretty early. I'm an early riser. Now, when I was in a punk rock band, I was not an early riser. That's
We'll talk about it some other
that's
time.
a different
yeah.
day. But now I'm an early riser. And so I spend that time in the morning kind of doing my devos and getting myself centered. I don't check email. I don't do any of that stuff. Then I look at my calendar. It's the first thing I do. And I look at the day. And what I do is I just look at every meeting that I have that day, and I just say a quick prayer. Lord, how do you want me to show up for that meeting today? How do you want me to be in this interaction today? And it really does help center me as I think about, like, okay, here we go. Here's how I'm going to show up today. Here are the things that I want to do for the team. Now, you know what? You have a meeting at 8:30 that doesn't go well, and that could derail your whole day.
Yeah, we're not perfect, right? We're
Yeah,
gonna mess up.
exactly.
Yeah.
But for me, that's what helps me like center and remind myself, this is how I want to show up. This is what I want to do. So I pray through my calendar most
I love
mornings.
that. That's actually I love that.
And it's a
yeah.
simple thing, it takes 5 minutes, but it really helps me just think about how I want to show up. Because truthfully, you're exactly right. It is lip service unless we actually do something with it.
Yeah.
And I think most of us that have a faith system or are believers, we want to be servant leaders, but it's hard to do
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's countercultural.
Yeah,
It really is.
We also know too that this is something that I've always believed, but more so than ever, I guess come to terms with is probably the best way to put it. Of like the Christian path is not an easy one. Like Christ says, you know what I'm saying? Like Christ
Yeah,
says,
totally.
right? Like the path is narrow, and everybody hears like the path is narrow, right? And it's easier, it's to pick up your cross and to follow Him. But when you think about what those things actually mean, like a narrow path, I've been, I'm a pretty avid hiker, backpacker, right? I've been on some narrow paths. Especially when you're hiking through the trails,
Yeah.
it's very difficult. It's very anxiety inducing, right?
Yeah.
To pick up your cross, well, you think about what that cross meant and what it was, right? Not just for Christ, right? But let's say for the victims of, the Roman Empire, right?
Yeah,
And being crucified. And then you think about our Savior actually having to carry His cross after what He had endured,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. What does that actually mean, right? Like you start to think about, this is a lot heavier. And that's one of the things I think over the last, especially year or two, I've come to maybe not understand more, but the Lord has opened my eyes more of there's just so much more depth here, right?
Yeah.
And the servant leadership, going back to that, that's not an easy calling.
No.
It's not meant to be easy.
No.
Like you're gonna mess up, you're gonna fall, but that's what number one grace is for.
Yeah.
And then that's the beauty of our relationship with Christ is that we're not perfect, but we get to be made perfect in Him.
Yeah.
Right.
And how does that happen? Day by day.
Exactly.
It happens day by
Moment
day,
by
right?
moment,
Moment by moment,
Yeah.
day by day.
Yeah.
That relationship, that's how it happens. And so I come back to that a lot. That's why I started that habit several years ago of praying through my day.
Yeah.
As a way of just saying I want to center myself today on what's in front of me today, because God, you are ordaining moments today. Like when I walk across the campus with a kid who says, "No, I want to," like, how do I know this guy?
Yeah.
Like that's a God moment, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't on my calendar, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that was a
But
God.
you were prepared for it.
Exactly, and that's the beautiful thing, is that it really just takes being intentional. Here's the deal: it's hard work to be a founder of a startup. Like I don't want to, like, my startup is me, so it's pretty simple.
Right. Yeah.
But the work that you guys do is tough work.
Yeah.
So in the midst of all of that, being more intentional about my connection to who Christ is and how I spend time with Him and how I'm nourished and what that looks like for you is your journey. But I will, if I could strongly encourage you with anything, it's that find that space that you can connect with Jesus, because that's the only way that we can then turn around and live this stuff out. I can't do it in my own strength. I can do it for a couple days, but that's the extent of it.
Yeah, it's like motivation, right?
Exactly.
The difference between motivation and discipline.
Yep.
Right. Discipline's what carries you day to day. The motivation, I've seen it firsthand in my life. It leaves pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did 15 keynotes over the last few months on the leader paradox, right?
Right.
I can motivate people
Yeah.
for a day or two.
Yeah.
It's the long-term commitment to making it happen.
Yeah. What would you say? I know for me personally, I really struggle to be present. And that may be because of the ADHD, right? Like
Yeah, probably something to do with it, but yeah.
It doesn't help, right, by any means. But I know for me, because being a founder, you're thinking about
Totally.
a million and one things. I got to call the client. We got to get the marketing initiative out, right? Got to make that outreach. We got to fix, this dev issue. Like there's a million. I got to get with the DevOps guy. Got to talk to our investors, right? Like that's just the list today. You know what I'm
exactly.
saying? So what would you say to them? I mean, you do this, right? You're a consultant for companies, for leaders. I'm not sure if anyone ever talks about being present with you. I'm sure they do.
Oh, no, it's one of the things I talk about with them. It's hugely important. I talk about it just with leaders. So take the Christianity piece out of it for a second. Just as a human, as a leader, one of the best things you can do for your team is be present. It's also one of the hardest things to do is to be present, because it's not just like I can put my phone on airplane mode, but I got a watch that's got things coming to it. I got, like, what I'm thinking about, like this thing that I got to do, this thing that I got to do. And so being fully present is so hard to do. And I think you have to just first acknowledge that and then add to it, well, how would Christ have me respond in this situation? And how do I prioritize like Christ? Like I sort of have that conversation in my head when I was looking at my schedule one day and I had this and this and this. And I was like, how do you think Jesus would prioritize my day? And are there things I'm working on that really I don't need to be working on? And I think that sometimes, even as founders who have a faith, one of the things that we can rely on is, okay, listen, we've got these plans that are in front of us, but we can also say, Jesus, give me wisdom in how to navigate through this so I can be present with the folks I need to be present with, but also finish the things that are on the to-do list, because the company's got to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And so I think the wisdom piece and asking for it, what does the Bible say? If you ask, he'll pour it out. He'll give it to you.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Why you said it's the most important thing. It's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
But it's also the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
Is it important because that way people know that you are
You-
looking at them, you care?
Yeah,
or-
you care about them. Yeah. One of the worst things that you can do as a leader, in all honesty, is to multitask when someone's having a conversation with you.
Oh yeah, 1,000%.
And yet we do it every day.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're checking our phones.
Internally,
we got,
right? Yeah.
all kinds of things
I
going
know
on.
for me, that's when I'm meeting with people. Like I put the stuff away. I
have to,
want to
yeah,
make them
it's so
feel.
hard.
That's probably my sales background as well.
Sure,
It's like
yeah.
you want them to feel like they're the most important person, because they are in that moment. Like,
Right.
yeah, you are my top priority right now.
Right,
Outside of
exactly.
taking some notes, that's all I'm doing. You know, but internally, especially as a founder, I still try to do that. And I don't have my phone on. But but in my mind,
Yep.
I'm like thinking about, okay, what's the next thing I have to do? You know?
And I think that's where we have to actually acknowledge that we have a lot of things on our mind. One of the things I talk to leaders about, my favorite is when I say, what kind of leader are you? And they're like, oh, I'm an open door leader. And I'm like, how's that working out for you? Because it's actually not the best way to lead.
Yeah.
An open door policy is fantastic if you also have a closed door policy.
Yeah. You're saying that you have scheduled time for
exactly.
your people.
So my team knows at the university that if my door is closed, unless the building is on fire or it's a legitimate need, I need to work and focus on these things. Now, they might knock on the door, and I've told them this. If you feel like it's something we need to have a conversation about, knock on the door. And my first question will be, is this important right now? And if they say yes, then I will stop what I'm doing. If I'm on my computer, I'll turn away from my computer because that's the only way I'm going to be present.
Yeah.
Is to turn away physically, like move my body. And so then we'll have the conversation. And so an example is just last week, door was closed. Someone knocks on it. Is this the right time? Yeah, I needed to ask you this question. Okay, so they do. I deal with it. And then as they're getting ready to leave, I say, hey, guess what? In the future, this probably didn't need to happen right now. I answered the question, but then I also use it as a teaching moment.
Yeah.
Like in the future, let's think about this a little bit more. Like I'm happy to answer the question, just not right now at this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyway.
Yeah. Are there any examples throughout Scripture? Like obviously, we talk a lot about Christ in the show because Christ is that he is Christianity. He is our Savior. He is our God, right? But also, our logo for Faithful Founder is based off of the burning bush in Exodus, right? Because Moses was called to a mission, a divinely inspired mission from God, right? A mission that he did not feel like Moses clearly felt unworthy for the mission.
Yeah, exactly.
He was clearly nervous about it. I know a lot of founders, like, you're excited, you jump in, but imposter syndrome, I mean, it comes quick and it comes often. I can speak from personal experience, right? Are there any examples, in Scripture outside of the Gospels that you ever point to or think directly would help founders?
It's funny that you would ask that. First off, you're putting my master's in theological studies to the test. I got you.
That's a whole different. We could have a whole other podcast about all that. So,
I think that I would point to someone like Paul, for instance, right?
Paul, a big fan of Paul.
Yeah, who. You didn't start out, going a certain direction, but had an encounter with God that changed everything.
Yes.
And then from that moment on, Paul's entire life was about the mission that God had given him. Yeah. And I think that those what I would call defining moments, that's the stuff that shape us. Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that we come back to when things get hard.
Yes.
Those are those moments that ground us and keep us connected to something bigger than ourselves, which is, I think, really important, especially when you're in the world of startup. And I just was talking with a friend earlier today, and she said something to me that I'm going to start to kind of put into my own life, because I was talking about my own imposter syndrome. And she said, I look at it through the lens of not being an imposter, but being an explorer. And I thought that was a really powerful way of looking at it, right? Because an explorer gives yourself permission to no, this is the first time I've been here. I don't really know how this is going to go. So
totally,
that's just extra.
Are you familiar? Are you familiar with Tom Bilyeu?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Tom. He's like, I have my entrepreneurship, guys that I'm a big fan of, and he's one of them.
Yeah, sure.
I've followed him for years, and he said, take on the identity of a learner.
Yep.
Right. Because then it's okay that you don't know things.
Right.
It's okay. Like, in one of my favorite lines, and it really resonated with me, because he started Quest, I think, at like 31, 32, right? Sure. Like, he wasn't like a Zuckerberg or whatever, And they sold it for $1 billion, right? For those who don't know, Tom Bilyeu, Quest Nutrition, all that stuff.
Yep.
And he talked about how he was like, I was incredibly average, and I knew it. I was incredibly average when I started Quest, and I was okay with being average.
Yeah.
But I was not okay with staying average. Right. And that to me is like, because I feel, I used to have on my Instagram bio, a mediocre man following a perfect one. That's how I look, because I am. I changed it to imperfect man following a perfect one, because I think that more encapsulates who I am. But I really embrace that. I'm mediocre right now. I'm average right now. I just refuse to stay there.
Yep.
Right.
And that's the growth mindset, which is
Yes.
hugely important.
So you've read that book, Mindset by Carol
Oh
Dweck,
yeah,
I would
absolutely.
imagine.
Yep.
Yeah. What would you do you implement the brain plasticity and the growth mindset into your practice?
Oh yeah.
Give us some insight on that if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no. So for me, I love to infuse learning into every day as much as possible. So, for instance, even the conversation about Explorer, I said to the person who was sharing it, I said, I'm glad I got out of bed this morning because that's a great way for me to think about, and I'm going to start to apply that. I'm going to start to apply those principles. And so I like to practice unlearning as well. It's a tool that I use. And so just because I've done something the same way every day or the same, sometimes it's like, maybe I should try this different.
Yeah.
So I want to unlearn it and relearn it. Now, here's what I have found. You need to be really cautious about what you decide to unlearn.
Absolutely.
You've probably heard the story about the guy who wanted to learn to ride the bike backwards, right?
No.
Oh, so he had his friends create a bike that if you turned right, it would go left, and if you turn left, it would go right.
Yeah.
And so it took him months to learn how to ride a bike that way, but then he eventually was able to. He rode it across the stage on this great presentation that he was doing. And then it took him twice as long to relearn how to ride a bike the right way.
Incredible, man.
So
yeah.
So I always tell people, be careful what you unlearn.
Yeah.
But practice unlearning, find those spaces, because that's what actually helps your mind to continue to grow in that space and to have that growth mindset.
That book is pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing. And for me, what was so amazing about it was I have a very addictive personality. And I know that about myself. Like, I go all in on things. Like I'm going to see hockey in every one of the hockey arenas, right? So I've hit 22 of 32. Like I'm all in on that.
Yeah.
And then I find myself like obsessing over, okay, how do I get to Toronto? How do I get here? And these things. And that addictive personality for some people, that can lead them into some pretty dark places.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And those addictions that can be incredibly dangerous. And for a period of my life when I was younger and I was struggling with some of those hardcore addictions, I always thought to myself, I'll never be able to get on the other side of this. It will always just be who I am, until I learned about the whole neuroplasticity, how you can actually affect change in your brain, what that actually looks like. Now, let's start with the fact that it comes through the power of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
For believers.
Absolutely.
But you can actually continue to grow and change, and you don't have to say, this is who I am forever. You can actually grow and change those, and those habits of, the 10,000 hours and all of those things that they say make you an expert or make you this. Those are all part of the journey of of allowing your mind to continue to grow and not get fixed on this is who I'll always be.
Yeah, I love that's, like I said, it's been instrumental in my life because it's easy to fall, at least for me, it's easy to fall in traps of like negative self-talk.
Totally.
And my dad always told me growing up, he's like, you'll never need anyone to kick you in the butt because you'll do it enough yourself, right? That's how it has been my entire life. Like
sure.
I was sick last week for a couple of days and was feeling pretty rough on Saturday, and I woke up on Sunday still feeling kind of rough and but feeling better. And I told my wife, I'm like, man, I'm such a bum. I haven't done anything in like 3 days, And she was like, you've been really sick. Like, it's okay. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like that's one of those things that, I guess that's a question I really plan on asking you. Do you ever talk to anybody in those kind of mindsets of like, one of the things I always fall into is I always have to be productive. And if I'm not, then I'm a bum.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not doing enough. I'm a failure, or I'm going to be a failure. Right. And that's really hard to balance because I have 2 kids. I have a wife. Right. Like I have to, so there's twofold question. How do you work through that negative self-talk, productivity trap that you can fall into?
Yeah.
And then prioritization, because prioritization, especially for faithful founders, you talked about it earlier, you have to prioritize a spiritual life in a relationship with the Lord above the business. The business still matters. It's still a priority.
Exactly.
But it's not the top priority.
Yeah.
So
I think you ask a really good question, and I'll start by saying this. I work with so many leaders, especially in the C-suite of organizations, who struggle with that very thing. If I'm not doing, who am I?
yeah.
And if I'm not fill in the blank, then obviously I'm not doing something, and so therefore I'm less than. Anytime our identity is tied to what we do, that's the struggle. And
Yeah.
it is a struggle,
Fact.
especially even more so for founders. It's your idea, it's your baby, it's your hard work,
Right.
it's the hours upon hours upon
Yeah.
hours of
Yeah.
not just dreaming, but of making it happen,
Yeah.
of blood, sweat, and tears.
Bringing it to life.
Exactly.
It
Yep.
goes. I had a friend the other day just said, "How does it feel to literally you had this idea and now it exists?"
Exactly.
Right. And I'm like, it should feel great, but I feel like I'm not doing enough.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. So I would say to you and others that are
Yeah.
in that space that there are times when you have to actually take your foot off the gas, or else you will always feel like the only way I'm productive is with my foot on the gas. And so then you will constantly be moving and moving and moving and moving and moving. And sometimes sitting and resting and taking a walk with your wife or your kids is the best thing that you can do.
Absolutely. I would say more often than not, it probably
Yeah,
is.
and it's a awesome reset. I've gotten into recently, literally, like the idea of walking in the grass in bare feet. And there's a whole bunch. My wife's all
Yeah.
into this
I've
grounding
been
stuff.
on that for a while.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I didn't know about it, but
Yeah.
she introduced me to it, and it's really powerful. But you know who used to do that all the time? Steve Jobs. Every time he ran into a situation that he didn't know what he was going to do, he would take his shoes off and go for a walk in the grass. And so,
Easier when you're in Northern California.
well, okay, I'll give you that.
I'm just-
It'd be a good day today. It's what 27 degrees out there.
Yeah, the grass is a little spiky right now. You know.
So, but I think that you have to give yourself permission. And I think that's the hardest part for leaders,
Absolutely.
especially
Yes.
most leaders that are entrepreneurs, most leaders that have moved into a C-suite. Many of them are pretty driven individuals.
Yeah.
And so
have to be.
that drive can be a great thing. But if that drive left untethered can be incredibly dangerous. And so you're the only one who can make the decision to take your foot off the gas. And you got to know when's the right time and when's the wrong time. And you're going to get it right sometimes. You're going to get it wrong sometimes. But if you don't, then what happens is you have a harder time prioritizing those things that are most important.
Yeah.
I was just talking with a leader
Yeah.
recently who he is working on his second doctorate. I don't know how many you need.
Yeah. Right.
I had a hard enough time with this one. I'm not interested in doing another one.
Yeah.
But he's working on his second doctorate. He's been in school for 13 years.
Yeah, there ain't no way.
And he's got 6 kids. He works a full-time job. And I'm like, bro,
How?
like, how are you doing this and how are you prioritizing? And we had a real intense, he's a believer, so we had a real intense conversation about, okay, so when is enough? What is enough? And what is God teaching you in this process
Yeah.
of all of this, of the importance of how do you prioritize your family in the midst of the work that you do?
Yeah.
And it's more so harder for founders, startups, because you're wearing multiple hats. But you also know you got kids at home who you're not gonna get the 4-year-old birthday again or the 6-year-old
Yeah.
play at school again, and so you have to prioritize all of those things. That's hard work.
It sounds like to me the answer to, like you said, taking the foot off the gas and not and untethering yourself is the prioritization.
You have
that is the answer. That's how you do it.
You have to do it.
So I'm gonna prioritize that time because you can't just say, okay, I'm gonna chill more.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take the foot off the gas more. I'm gonna spend more time because it doesn't because you say that. Like
Yeah.
I've said that. Like just the other day, I told my wife, hey, I'm gonna take the afternoon off because I haven't taken a day off in 10 days or no weekends or
Yeah,
whatever. I
yeah.
always take off Sundays, but even then I get caught up in because I want to go to church and stuff like that. But then I'm like Sunday night, I'm sitting around. I'm like, I should probably take care of that thing before Monday comes around, which I don't want to do, but I do. But I told my wife, hey, I'm gonna take off an afternoon. I want to hang out with you and the kids. And then I didn't put it in my calendar. I didn't circle it. Nothing like that. It wasn't in my planner.
Yeah.
And then stuff popped up, and I had to go and take care of it.
Yep.
And so you have to schedule.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna say, all right, I'm good.
If you don't, it's not just going to happen magically. As
Yeah.
much as you would like it to, and as much as you say that. And here's the other thing, and I don't think I really have an answer for this. Maybe that just to say like, ask Jesus to help you. But
Yeah.
when you're with your family, being present with your family.
Absolutely. Yeah,
That's,
100%.
I mean, my kids are 25 and 21, and it's real quick story. When they were 10 and 14, I checked into a counseling center because I had an inability to say no, and I was spiraling in lots of different areas. And this counseling center was a 30-day, like they took my phone away from me. They're like, you need to just work on you. I couldn't have anything that connected to the internet. I had to find an iPod that didn't connect to the internet. Talk about old school.
Yeah, right.
I had to find a calling card to call my wife. I didn't have a phone. Yeah, they still make calling cards, by the way.
Yeah. It's awesome.
But in that whole process, my kids are 10 and 14 at the time. They came up to counseling. I finished up the counseling session, and I came back. And the next job that I got, I told my boss, every Friday morning, I'm gonna come into work at 9 instead of 8, because I'm taking one of my boys to breakfast every other Friday. And my boys were 10 and 14. They're now 25 and 21. My 21-year-old will tell me anything. He talks to me about everything, even stuff that I'm like, we shouldn't tell your mom you're going to jump off that building or, do those things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But that came from a lot of breakfasts where it was a lot of yes, no questions.
Yeah.
But I made the time. That was a priority for me. And I'm glad I did. At 10 and 14, I missed a lot already.
Yeah.
But I saw a lot as well. And so when my 25-year-old graduated from Boise State, I got to be the first person that hugged him as he walked across the stage. I got to be a part of that day. And so those moments are those are things you don't forget.
It's funny because yesterday, I was talking to somebody, a good friend of mine, and they've put a lot of emphasis on their career and a lot of self-importance into their career, And we're talking about a pretty sensitive issue, and it kind of got heated. This conversation did about they felt like they were doing all these really important things. I'm not saying they aren't. Like I agreed. I was like, yeah, I can see where you're helping people and all these things. And then it was followed up with the comment they said to me, which was, "What are you doing?"
Wow.
And I said, I was like, in the first, like all these things came through my head of like what I was doing. I'm starting a artificial intelligence startup, right? Like I'm doing this, I'm doing that, right? And the first thing that I said was, I'm raising my family.
Good for you. Good for you, man.
And I was like, if more people did, I'm not saying I do it perfectly. I don't. I mess up every day, right? But my kid, I've said it 1,000,001 times. I told my wife when we got married, before we even had kids, I will not be perfect. I will mess up. I'm not going to be the best dad. So my dad is me and my dad are homies, right? I'm not going to be. I will look back and say, because of my nature, I wish I could have done better in 1,000,000 different ways.
Yeah.
But the one thing I know, and my kids will always know, is that I love them.
Yep.
Right. And I told this friend of mine, I said, if more people took the time to raise families the way that they ought to, I'm not saying all of our problems would be solved, because they wouldn't be. We live in a fallen world.
Yeah.
But a lot of problems would be.
That's so true.
Right.
True.
And I know, and I told him, it's funny because this came to my mind as I was speaking to them. And we'll end on this. I told him, I'm raising my kids to mourn those who mourn, to comfort those who stand in need of comfort.
Love it.
Right.
Love it.
To take their shirt off the back if someone needs it more than they do, to be in the places they need to be. Right.
Yeah.
And most importantly, to follow God.
Yep.
That's what I'm teaching my kids to do.
Amen. Good job, man.
And my hope is that, going back to the founder perspective, is that you do those things in the founder mindset, because I think it's more than possible to do those things as a founder, and that, but at the same time, you won't forget the things that matter the most, which is your relationship with Christ, which is the discipleship, which is, if you are married and have children, those are more important than your business. Your business matters.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't. You need to make revenue, you need to employ your people, take care of your customers.
Yep.
Obviously, we're founders for a reason, but it does not take precedence over the things that truly matter in the end, right?
That's right.
But I don't know if you have any parting message that you want to say to our listeners, or if there's anything burning that you feel like you need.
No, I just want to say thanks. It's such a great opportunity to be able to talk faith. I don't get to do that very much.
Yeah.
And so to be able to talk faith in the midst of this business world that we live in, the things that are priorities, but how do we keep the main thing in the midst of all of it? So thanks for having me. It was super fun to hang out with you, and
appreciate it, brother.
Yeah.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Everybody, go find him. Your latest book is The Leader Paradox.
No, my latest book is Change Leadership. Just came out last week.
Okay, there we go.
So
say the title one more time.
Change Leadership.
Okay, and where can everybody find it?
You can find it on Amazon.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, I would highly recommend. I'm going to go find that book myself. So, and I'm going to read The Leadership Paradox on top of it.
That's perfect.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thanks
For guys for tuning in. We'll see y'all.